All right, and Trish here, who's been fantastic with getting us speakers for each of these, as well as just being great at giving advice to D1 and the other colleges around here. She's she's the head of community and social media at Simpler. She's an engaging public speaker and co-founder and chief energy officer at BOSFilipinos. Um, from a party coordinator at Chuck E. Cheese to vice president of community and customer experience at a video messaging startup, she's gathered lots of valuable lessons around building online and offline communities, creating amazing customer journeys, and producing sold-out events.
And Maria is a mental health counselor and life coach specializing in two areas, perinatal and emotional health during preconception and fertility, pregnancy, postpartum, and early parenthood, and race and culture and their impact on identity, relationships, and mental health. And she uses an equity, feminist, and justice lenses to understand her clients' experiences.
And the purpose of this series is the culture and identity series and panels that we've been doing is to help expose college students to what it might be like in the workforce, both as like someone transitioning from college into work and as a Filipino American for the most part as well. So our first question is general to both of you, which is, how connected do you feel, weak, medium, or strongly, to your Filipino or Filipino American heritage? And how has that affected your career path?
Trish, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I feel like for me, it's gotten stronger over time. So my parents are both from the Philippines. I grew up in New Jersey, and I grew up in a household where my mom was very tied and still is very tied to her Filipino identity. All of her friends are Filipino. Everything we cooked in the house is Filipino. And when my dad came here, he kind of said, we're American now. And for him, American meant not being tied to his Filipino identity at all. So not speaking the language, not cooking the food. And so I grew up in this household of a parent that was very much tied to the Philippines and another parent that was like, oh, for me, American means doing all the American, what he perceived as American things versus living his life. So I didn't realize, I think until after or in college or after college, how compartmentalized my identity was. So I called it Filipino nights and weekends because my dad would, prep my food for school, and I'd have, the turkey sandwich and the high C and whatever. And then my mom would make dinuguan at home. And like, I just wouldn't talk about that stuff at school because I was also from K through 12, the only Filipina or Filipino person in my school. And so when I got into the workforce, it was very interesting because I didn't have any Filipino colleagues for a very long time. The first time I ever spoke on a panel in tech with another Filipina was in my 30s. Like it was a while, especially in the tech industry. I'm often the only woman, and I'm usually the only Southeast Asian woman in the room. So for me, I don't know if it impacted me as I like kind of sit inside of these rooms, and maybe there'll be a discussion where, someone will say something and there's like a tinge of not quite understanding a person of color's journey in, via either that's a customer or a colleague. So sometimes I feel that, but I don't know if, besides the fact that when I went to school, the arguments with my family about becoming a nurse and that kind of situation as someone that is afraid of blood. I definitely had a lot of discussions with my parents because I didn't go into the roles that they had kind of wanted me to go into, but the tie has definitely gotten stronger. I think especially, starting BOSFilipinos. So it's definitely been an interesting journey based on like where I started. But I feel like it gets stronger as I grow older based on what I grew up with.
Oh, you're still muted, Maria?
Sorry. Trish, I think you and I have spoken about our New Jersey connection. I think we really need to sit down and talk more about that. I have always felt very strongly connected to my heritage. My Filipino community growing up was mostly the University of the Philippines College of Medicine class of 1968. The people my father came with to the East Coast to continue his medical training. And of course, I have to be a dutiful daughter and say hello to my father and my stepmother who are on this Zoom call. There they are waving. And I actually think half the people on this Zoom are related to me by blood. So hello. We spent many holidays and weekends and birthdays together in this community. And this is how I learned about food and our language and songs, the importance of family, and significantly the meaning and the sacrifice of immigration, particularly because I think for every one of us, family was, in the Philippines while we were growing up in the United States. I say it frequently. I will almost always introduce myself as the daughter of an immigrant, meaning that I will almost never say who I am without telling you first who my father is. My life in this country, I have always seen as my debt to him. And that is the story of many immigrant children, or that is the story of many second and third generation immigrants. Whatever I choose to make of my life, my personal life and my professional life, I am determined to make it a success because what I do in this country is because of him and the sacrifices that he made. Why else did he come, right? Why else did he come here? Why else I think that is the life, that is the story of the children of immigrants everywhere. Why else did they come here? So it took me a long while to get on the career path that I'm on because I had to define success and happiness and what satisfaction meant to me as the daughter of an immigrant. And as a daughter of an immigrant, I needed to make my dad very proud of me.
Wow, those were both phenomenal answers. I definitely get a little bit of both. I see a lot more of Maria's answers and how my mom interacts with her family and connects with the culture. And I feel like I personally connect a lot with like what Trish was saying, with kind of like when I would visit the Filipino side of my family, that's when I would get little doses of Filipino-ness until I was engaging with it for myself and actively seeking it. So our second question for both of you is, outside of Filipino heritage, what do you think is your most defining identity, and how has that shaped your career path?
Yeah, so I think being, a woman again in tech, so it took me a long period of time to find how much I love tech, but especially it's changed a bit over the past 10 years or so that I've been working in startups in particular. But it's funny because when I started BOSFilipinos, there was a guy that worked in my office that was 2 tables over. And he said to me, "I didn't know you were Filipino," because he was part Filipino. And we started talking about how we just never talked about it in the office because there was just like no representation. And in a lot of tech, there is some diversity, but it's usually among men. And so when I walked into your room for a tech event, it was generally the thing that people's heads would turn is because I was a woman. So I think for me in particular, that is definitely something that in tech, when I was first coming up, would be like the hat switch of, okay, if I'm generally in a room, people notice that I'm a woman, but if there happen to be, people of color in the room, it was generally because I was a woman of color. So there's usually those 2 things that people comment the most on. Or when I'm at a tech event, especially in startups where there aren't, more initiatives to diversify groups, and it's generally like very homogenous when you look at a lot of these early stage companies. If you think about Access and who can take, these jobs and internships, and that's a whole other discussion. But that is definitely, being a woman for sure is like the bigger hat that I've worn in my tech and startup career, even more so than being Filipino, for sure.
So on the flip side of my Filipino heritage, I think being an American woman has had a great impact on my career path. Like my father, my uncles, and my grandfathers, as well as some of the trailblazing women in my family, I was supposed to go into medicine. I don't know that anybody ever sat down and spoke with me about going into medicine, but I think it's something that I knew. And because my family and others in the UP class of 68 literally sacrificed everything to come to the US, great things were also expected of us, the first generation of kids born here. And greatness meant that we were going to go to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, or Columbia, and we were going to be doctors as well. But I was also an American teenage girl, so I was a rebel. I smoked cigarettes in the basement and I wrote poetry and song lyrics. I was going to be a starving performing artist of some sort. I applied to one college, one that 30 years ago, 30 plus years ago, no one had ever heard of. And it had something like an 80% acceptance rate. I applied early so that I wouldn't have to worry about it anymore, like from December on. And my bachelor's degree and my first master's degree are in writing. I think, Joshua, you said you're a creative writing major. And my first real job was as a full-time faculty member in the English department of a community college. I taught 4 classes a term, 4 days a week. I had my summers off and paid so I could do lots of writing. It was a dream job. And it turned out to be a dream job for somebody else, because while I loved writing and I have 2 unpublished novels, I absolutely hated teaching. It took me a long time and a whole other career choice and another graduate degree before I became a mental health clinician. And because I had 3 children in the time that it took me to really figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, I became a mental health clinician kind of unconventionally and late compared to my colleagues. And I think that's also pretty significant being an American woman. The principles of American feminism tell us that we can have it all. How that plays out practically is a little bit different than how it plays out in principle. A whole other talk could be based on childcare and the cost of maternity leave on a woman's career and all of that stuff. But there's a cost of another type of that. So anyway, I think so being an American woman, being an American teenager and being an American woman also plays a huge role in how my career has played out.
Nice. Okay, I think we'll start asking like your individual questions. So we'll start with Maria. And so the first question for you is, on your site, it says that you have an interest in working with clients who are immigrants, people of color, are part of the LGBTQ community. And so why do you think it's important to prioritize these clients? Oh, I think you're unmuted again. Or
Sorry. I keep doing that. It's about 2 things, really. The first is about representation. I think clients want to see themselves in their counselors. So that means that for my clients, somebody may want to see somebody who is Asian, someone who is non-white, someone who is a woman, someone who is a mother, someone who is the daughter of immigrants, often some combination of these things. My style of counseling is also to share some of my experience. you know, in a very orthodox kind of counselor-client relationship. You are not supposed, and this is very traditional, very orthodox, you're not supposed to share these kinds of things. You know, you're supposed to stand very firmly on the clinician side and not share any of your experience while your patient, you know, confides all of these things to you, and you're supposed to have a very clinical diagnostician kind of hat on. And nobody really practices that way, I don't think. But you know, I share a lot of I share a lot of my experiences with my clients if it's relevant and if it's helpful. And so I think my clients come to me looking for these things. And I think the other piece is that experience and competence really matters. What does it mean for my clients to be born in another country and starting a family in the United States? Or what does it mean to identify with one culture and start a family with somebody else who identifies as a white American, or perhaps has identified as a white American for generations? What does it mean in that situation? And then to use a donor egg, perhaps. What does it mean to be considered an other all of your life? And then you want to do something that everybody else gets to do and take for granted. And if you don't have, for instance, if I don't have an exact shared experience or an identity, or I don't share an identity with my client, do I have the resources to learn about their perspectives so that I can work with them in a way that is affirming of their narrative and their experience? Can I suggest exercises and behavioral change that is not insulting or condescending or against their cultural norms, but is affirming of their beliefs and of their struggle? And I think in my field, there is still so much work to do, particularly in the perinatal field, perinatal being anything having to do from pregnancy all the way to early parenting, postpartum and early parenting. It's such a very, very, very white field. And the contradiction in that is that those who are at greatest risk for postpartum pregnancy and postpartum mental health problems are people who are not white. And so we have a disconnect right there, people who are seeking help for mental health complications from an overly white clinician population. And so there we have a lot of racial assumptions, preconceived notions, and we have the potential to do a lot of damage. So this is really important to have that kind of, at the baseline, cultural competence, but also cultural affirmation and positivity.
Kind of a follow-up question. So how have your own like personal experiences and identity as a Filipino like shape the way you interact and counsel your clients?
So I was thinking about this. I've worked in a situation where I was working with a couple. It's a mixed race couple, and the woman, it's a couple who they're dealing with a fertility challenge, and they've come to the realization that the only way for them to have a baby is with a donor egg. If the woman is going to get pregnant, she needs to have a donor egg. And you know, it's, you know, scientifically it's an amazing thing. So she doesn't have enough eggs, so so her system cannot stimulate egg production on her own, so she's not a good candidate for in vitro fertilization, anything like that. So you know, it's an option that plenty of women can use and have used, and it's a way for her to experience pregnancy. It's a way for her to go into labor and to give birth. And if that also works, it's a way for her body to then go into lactogenesis, for her body to produce milk, so that she can also then have a breastfeeding experience with her infant. All of that is amazing stuff. Science is incredible. The issue for her is that she is a Black woman who can trace her She can trace, I believe it's her, some ancestor, it might be her great grandmother, her great great grandmother, to a plantation somewhere in the South. And if she uses a donor egg, sure, she can choose from a profile. You know, you can choose a profile of what characteristics you would like the egg to have. She's very proud of her heritage as a Black woman who can trace her ancestry to slavery, and she can trace the plantation where one of her ancestors comes from. What does it mean to her that her bloodline literally stops with her? And so what does it mean to her as a mother who and her as a mother who cannot continue who can't continue her DNA? And what are the mental health implications for her as a mother when she becomes a mother? So those are the kinds of issues that I deal with, and of course I don't have that experience. I come from a completely different family line. I don't have the experience of infertility. However, I do have an understanding of what it means to not belong to somebody, or to not belong to something, to be an outsider in a world. And if she were to go if she were to enter therapy with a very white clinician, and the fertility world is also a very, very white field, there could be a lot of harm and misunderstanding and disconnect. So so those are the clients that I try to see, and that's where I try to take my personal experience as well as my clinical training and expertise. I try to marry those kinds of things into my counseling room. I think I may have gotten off topic a little bit, but I think I sort of got there.
That was perfect. Thank you. I think we have questions for Trish now.
There's somewhat of a going theme of narrative and being able to assist people through like shaping story and connection here. So our first question is, you seem to have held a lot of positions that like community building, customer experience, that I assume rely on your style, personality, and ability to connect with others, as well as like your prior experience with like other businesses and starting things. How did you decide that that would be part of your career, and how did that affect your relations with others in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if I kind of go back to the core of why I started working on community building, it's because of feeling othered. So growing up, I grew up in a predominantly white town. I was bullied. The first time I heard "go back to where you come from" was when I was 5 and I was playing in front of my front yard, and the grandmother of a neighbor was yelling at me. I had no idea what it meant. My parents like pulled me in the house. We did not discuss it. We did not talk about racism a lot as I was growing up. But when I was in junior high, my brothers were very, this is going to make me sound so old. I was like, they're very into the internet when I was growing up. And my brother introduced me to online forums where you didn't necessarily have to have any identity. You didn't have to tell people if you're male or female, you didn't have to say your sexual orientation. You didn't have to post a picture. You could just interact with people as people without any other things. You know, maybe when you're in community, there's like some identifier you all love. One of my first communities was Sailor Moon. I'm just going to put it out there. And that's where I found a lot of my people. But discovering that online, like there were these places outside of my tiny town where I didn't always fit in. There are these places online or places that I could connect with people. That was always very interesting to me. The title of community manager or community builder, there have always been those people that role in particular, especially in tech, kind of rose in the last like 15 or so years. But I was kind of, operating at, when I came to this point of not being shy and getting into places where I could find people that understood me, that connect with me in a lot of different ways. I was now always that person of, if I saw someone being left out, or, if someone just like wasn't sitting with them, I was always then that person, because I just like knew what it like to feel othered or to be on my own. And so it didn't really come to be a career path, or me thinking about a career path, until post-college. I was the very first community, offline online community I was in, was for Yelp, actually, when it first launched in Boston. Pre-reviews, you would go into Yelp and say, who wants to have dinner tonight? And you would randomly have dinner with strangers, which now also seems so far off in pandemic times. But I remember, people getting together around food, and someone would say, who wants to go to Chinatown for dinner? And 20 of us would meet and go to like Peach Farm and in Chinatown and just share dishes with each other. And the community manager there at the time, who was actually part Filipino, Ligaya Tishi, who was employee number 5 at Yelp, if folks can believe that, told me, hey, have you ever thought about becoming a community manager? And I was like, do what you do? That seems really amazing and crazy. But it wasn't until she told me that it was like an actual job of, building communities, running events, building up relationships with people, as part of a tech company, that even became something that I knew was a job. I'd always done it. I didn't know there was a name for it. I didn't know there was a career path for it. So it didn't happen until post-college that I saw that as this thing that had always made me feel, all these feelings I had of being othered was actually like a superpower of mine, that I was able to apply to work. And so it is something that is really great, but also, there's sometimes I'm like, oh wait, am I projecting some of my feelings on community members or stuff like that? So that definitely comes up for sure. But it has been this really cool thing that I didn't realize how far it kind of dated back until I started thinking about it myself. So it was never, there are probably, I think what's cool and amazing for a lot of students right now is there's probably jobs that y'all will be doing in a few years that don't have names yet, that haven't been created yet, but your experiences will add up to that job at some point.
Yeah, I'm also curious because, like, to me and some I know people who like I grew up around, something that revolves around like community building or consulting might seem like a very sparse position. Like, do you have consistent work in this? Is that something that you have to worry about or have to like consolidate within yourself to make sure that like, okay, you're looking for the next thing? Or do you feel secure in each position when you're doing something like that?
Yeah, so it's definitely a hot role right now in marketing. So for a lot of people that are in marketing, more and more, especially in startups. So there is, for anybody that's interested in startups, there is actually a Massachusetts-based venture capital firm called Flybridge, and their whole thesis is finding companies that believe and are built on community. So it's very, very hot right now. But for me, I've always, and this is the startup world, I've always written jobs and then been like, hey company, I want to be your community builder. Here's my ideal job. Do you want to hire me? And so I'm very fortunate that I'm at that point in my career where I can do that. So this past company, there was no job in the budget for a community person. I started talking to the chief marketing officer who met me 10 years ago, and just was reminded of a video I had sent him to say thank you. Everybody, thank you letters and gratitude is really important. And we just started talking about the community that they're trying to build. And I was like, all right, let me write you a job description. If I can do this job, like, let's talk. So that's how that happened. My past 2 full-time community jobs, I wrote the job description and sent it to the CEO and said, here's what I would do here if you hired me. So there's that. And then in consulting, I always found it's interesting because it's such a, my portfolio, you can like Google, it's very like, you can look up my events, you can meet my community members. It's one of those really, it's like writing, you know, if people are like, are you a good writer? They'll be able to look at it. So for me, community, you'll be able to see, you know, the communities I've built online if you look them up. So I'm really lucky in that in Boston, I've networked a ton and met a lot of people and have been able to write job descriptions and send them in. That has not always been the case. It took a lot of networking and fine tuning and studying, and I still am always looking for opportunities to learn. And those kinds of things people get really excited about in community because it evolves a lot. So there's still a lot to learn, but I've never worried about work outside of at the beginning of the pandemic when I was consulting and people were just cutting budgets around that. Yeah, I've been pretty lucky that I've written job descriptions of companies and just been like, hey, I want to do this thing, hire me.
That's a big power move. It's nice to hear that you have like security in that as well. I'm curious, with something that seems so tied to who you are as a person, with like how you interact with others, how do you deal with failure in that? And it seems so close to like being part of who you are.
And this isn't just because Maria's on here. I think everyone should go to therapy. It's like number one. It's really, really tough. The first startup I worked at, I was the first employee. So I was hired, the CEO hired me, and it was the 2 of us for like 6 months. And his last startup was acquired by PayPal. And so he had a lot of weight on his shoulders for this company to succeed. It failed after about 4 years. And I actually was at an event. I left before they closed the doors and before they shut down. And I was at an event and a guy said, if you're so good at your job, then why did the company fail? And I was not an executive of the company. I was not a founder at the company. But that was like such a rude question to ask, but it was also really interesting too, because that particular company, I was the face of the company. So it was a video messaging company and I sent 15,000 one-to-one videos. So I was legitimately like the poster child of this company. And I honestly like went through a little bit of depression after I left because it was so tied to who I was as a person, especially in community. Like I get hired because not because I have a small child face that's really friendly and dimples, but like people tell me stuff. Like people like feel comfortable around me. So in community, you know, I wear my heart on my sleeve. It's very emotional. I told my boss today I was emotionally tired in the morning because when I get on calls, I'm representing the company. I have to be some form of happy in the face of a pandemic while also doing all this other stuff. Like this weekend, I was trying to find my mom a vaccine, like all this stuff, but my job is to be happy and helpful and a connector. So failure, like for a long, long time, I took it very personally. And there comes a point, and for me, because I'm just this kind of person, I had to burn out to realize how important my emotional health was. And I just was totally neglecting it. It is I loved my dad so much, but there was this like, you have to work 5-10 times harder than everybody else because people are going to look at you differently. And so it took me a long time to be able to like clock out. And I have this fear for a lot of people because now, you know, I did have jobs at one point where I could leave the computer and then go home. And now there's this, and my work is on this, and apps are on this that I have to go into. So it definitely is tough. Last year we had someone leave, and I was just working on a bunch of stuff. So you have to figure out, for me, I like kind of test my boundaries like to like the utmost, but it took me burning out to realize, you know, how important it is to separate myself and my work, and also recognize there are things that are in my power and there are things that like are not in my power. So that video company, for example, we started it before people had like smartphones, you know, and I was going around to people with flip phones and saying, you're going to record video on that thing. And people are like, what are you talking about? I really like texting. I don't understand it. So there were things like that where, especially with startups, like timing is everything and funding is everything. We didn't have enough money to be running the company. But for me in that time, I thought it was my fault because I sent 15,000 videos, and why couldn't I not get money in the door? But there's just so many other factors. So it can be really tough. And I also I'm really tough on myself too, but the importance of separating myself from my work is really important. Therapy is really important. Checking in, like I know like everyone's like self-care, bubble bath, which is good. But for me, last week, I took 2 emotional health days from work. And I told them that's why people are you going on vacation? And I was like, no, I am emotionally tired. Like I told my team that, and my boss was like, cool, take 2 days off. And I didn't answer any emails. I like didn't answer Slack. And I just worked on things for myself that I needed to do to recharge. And it took me a long time to figure out how to, I don't even ask for permission. I was like, I'm taking these 2 days. It wasn't like, can I take these 2 days so my brain can like feel better? It was, I am emotionally tired from all the work that we've been doing and I need to take 2 days. So that's like, and I'm, again, go to a therapist. I'm not your therapist. That is like what works for me. But yeah, it takes a while to separate yourself, especially when it is you that is like part of the project, to figure out like how to deal with failure and separating it from yourself, for sure.
I think it's really important as well to recognize that, particularly if your immigration history is very recent, what it means to work hard and what it means to be tired and what it means to need a break. That I'll speak personally, that for me to feel tired, for me to feel like I need a break, I mean, the story of my father's story is that he came to this country with, I think it's like $2,000 in his pocket that was borrowed from his father and his father-in-law. And what he needed to do, you know, as he was, I think it was he was completing his residency, before he could really earn any money as a doctor, he needed to pay that money back to his father and his father-in-law, on top of whatever money he was using to pay for his own rent. He had a young wife. His son, my older brother, was back in the Philippines, and then also he was paying money to like send back home to his family. And it's like, if that's the story you inherit, like, I'm going to say I'm tired. Like, how am I tired if that's the story you inherited? You know, like what kind of existential angst could I possibly be having if that's the story I inherited? You know, so I think that's the hard part about being about inheriting an immigrant story. Like that's none of the work that I did none of that work. You know, by the time I was born, my father was a doctor. We owned a home. I mean, like that part of the American dream was kind of settled for him and my mom, right? So I was born with that golden spoon, you know, like we had the American dream was pretty established. So I could go to school, I had food in my mouth, I had clothes. What does it mean to fail? right? I had everything. So this idea of failure, I think for the children of immigrants, this idea of, I think this is where I'm sort of going in a million different directions, but this idea of needing to work so hard, and then this idea that perhaps you don't know what you're doing, or you're working so hard in this fear of failure. It's because if you fail, you can't possibly be working harder than your immigrant parents did, because they worked so hard. Like there's nothing you could possibly do that is harder than what they did. And if you screw it up, wow, like that is just the biggest disappointment. And there's just nothing harder than what they did. So really your life should be easy. So I think there is that pressure that you have to do well. If you fail, you're not only screwing up your own thing, but like you're really it's just this disappointment. And so when I sit down with my clients and they are disappointed with what their life looks like, it's not just their own disappointment that they're living with. They are really bearing the weight of whatever it is that their parents had dreamed for them. And it's not like they have these overbearing parents. It's not like my father ever said, you're going to disappoint me. My father, you can see him, he's a lovely man. It's just this sense that there's this story you inherited and you have to live up to it. So I think as the children of immigrants, we have a lot of burden on us, and there's not a lot of space for our own failures, because our failures mean that our parents failed too, and we can't stand the fact that perhaps we failed our parents, because our failures are like they wear our failures too. I don't know if that makes sense, but
this is why you get people in both therapists, clinicians that understand your story, because that does not, what Maria just said does not always happen when you're talking to people that are supposed to help you think about some of this stuff, because they don't have that shared experience, or they didn't research to see how they could connect with their clients, because that is definitely what she said about that immigrant story is like not what you always hear from folks. So just as an FYI, that was really great.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And yeah, from personal experience, I've been through a few therapists who have like a variety of things that made me feel like they would more see me as a case study rather than as a person who has history and more nuance that needs like unraveling that I want to explore with them, which is my personal preference and styles. And I'm also curious, with all the people in the crowd, if we open up to open floor questions, especially with like all the family members or blood related people in the crowd. I'm not sure how open you are to questions from everyone, but if there are any questions that anyone wants to ask now, feel free to put it in the chat for them. Or unmute and ask away.
Hi, I have something to say. Can you hear me, Maria?
I can hear you, Papa.
Yeah. Thank you for putting me in such as being a role model, but I didn't hear you mention your mother. You never mentioned her. She was a big factor in your life.
Yeah, she was. Yep, she was. Yep, my for the folks who don't know, my mom died when I was just before my 15th birthday. So, and she came with my father to the United States in 1968, and she and my dad, see, this is what I'm saying, like how there is no pain like an immigrant pain. She and my dad made the decision to, like, I think I mentioned it, she and my dad made the decision to leave my brother behind in the Philippines. because I think they did not know what the United States would hold for them. And so I cannot even, I'm a mother of 3 children. I cannot even imagine making the decision to leave my 2-year-old son behind. I can't imagine the pain of leaving my son. I can't imagine being so worried about where I was going. I just can't imagine that choice. And so that's the pain of immigrants. That's the pain. And when I said earlier that that is the sacrifice of immigration. It's not just leaving your parents, and and they left the Philippines at a time when immigration was really screwed up, and they did not know when they could come back. They left. They were not American citizens when they left, and I think it was like, I don't know how long it was before they could get visas and they could travel. I was at least 13, maybe 12 or 13, but before they could go back to the Philippines to see their parents and to see their siblings. So they did not know when they would return, and they did not know when they would see their son. So these stories that we hear about overseas workers, that's their story. So yeah, so when I talk about when we talk about the sacrifice, and when we hear about people crossing borders now, when we hear about people risking their lives to cross their borders, my parents left their son, and as a mother, I can't imagine having to make those horrible choices. So before I get a little bit too weepy, I'll just say that immigrants are amazing people, and these are the weight. This is the weight that we carry as the children of immigrants.
Are there any other questions from audience?
I just see Peach Farm in caps, and I see therapy in caps in the in the chat. Someday, y'all. Peach Farm is still open. If you can get takeout from them, support them so that they're open post-pandemic.
Was that a Filipino restaurant in Massachusetts?
No, it's a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown.
Oh.
It's a great place, though. It's a great place. Open on holidays for anyone that can't travel home. That's, I think kind of going on Maria's point too, the like trying to feel the feels during the pandemic, but also recognizing my parents also came here in the 60s too, Maria, actually. And something that I've talked to my mom about is they went years without seeing their family. And I haven't seen my family in over a year and a half, or a little Christmas 2019, I think. And so we've been talking about traveling and keeping, family safe and that kind of stuff. But there is this, like, they went years without seeing their family. And so, we can go through that, but also recognizing what is happening right now, and allowing ourselves to feel that. But there is that comparison definitely to my parents first coming here. They actually met here in the US, and them not being able to see their families. So it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that just reminded me that I got a call from my dad last night, actually, and I realized I hadn't called him in like a month or so, and I haven't seen him in like 2 years. So stuff's canceled travel plans, canceled connections like that. Well, I see we're getting close to the end of the time as well. I want to thank you so much for being so open and authentic and sharing with this. This is more authentic than I could have ever imagined. I love having both of you just talking openly about topics that do matter to hear, even if I'm just speaking personally. So for closing remarks, is there anywhere we can reach you? LinkedIn, Twitter, website? And is there one last message that you would like to leave us with today?
Thank you. This was a great experience. I really I enjoyed prepping for this experience as well. Sure, my website is my name. Maybe I can put it in the chat. It's mariadolorico.com. And I can put my information, my Instagram. It's a little bit quiet, my Instagram, my Facebook information as well. I also did want to share that this Saturday, there's a Stop Asian Hate rally, which includes a vigil for Angelo Quinto. It is Saturday. I'll put this all in the chat. It's Saturday at 1 p.m. at the Parkman Bandstand in the Boston Common. Somehow I am arranging this. Didn't realize I was arranging as much of it as I am arranging, but we are standing in strong alliance with Black Lives Matter. So if you have no plans on Saturday at 1 p.m., you'd like to attend a vigil for Angelo Quinto, as well as stand in alliance with Black Lives Matter and to stand against some of the hate crimes that are happening, the increase in hate crimes that are happening against our Asian community, please join us at the Parkman Bandstand Saturday at 1 p.m. in the Commons. We'd love to see you. We'd love to have some solidarity, wear a mask. Please join us. Thank you. Thank you so much for this event. It was really great.
Yeah,
Yes.
people can find BOSFilipinos is generally, and I think Trish of the Trade, which is my handle on a few platforms, is listed there as well. But BOSFilipinos is BOS Filipinos, and we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a blog, we have a podcast. It's been a little bit quiet over the past year because our meetups were generally around food. And so a lot of us had a lot of stuff happen in our lives. So we're starting to post more. We have been a little bit quiet, but definitely follow BOSFilipinos, and then you'll see I'll tag myself, Trish of the Trade, in a few different places. And for folks that are looking to work in startups and you're interested, definitely find me on LinkedIn and send a personalized message if we have not talked. And I can give my info to Josh and Eden to share with folks. But yes, if you can join us on Saturday, that'd be really great, or from afar. But I hope everyone's doing okay. There's a lot of stuff to navigate right now. And if one thing I would leave is it's okay to ask for help, and really internalize that, because I know we want to do all the things ourselves, but it's okay to ask for help, whether that's professional help through a therapist, whether that's your friend group, whether that's your parents, but just don't be afraid to ask for help. All of us are here, so.
Thank you for inviting us. We really enjoyed this forum. It was very enlightening, and it's nice to see the next generation really coming up. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, and have a great night. Thank you for spending your Monday night with us.
Night.